You are listening to the Riverbend Youth Podcast. We hope this teaching deepens your relationship with Jesus and encourages you to share your faith with others. Please enjoy the message.
Well, last week I wasn't here because I was spending a few days out in the wilderness, which I will do from time to time. I've told you about it before. I was actually with Sage's husband, Rye, who's in the back, and we went out to some land, and there was actually this one moment where we kind of agreed to just go off on our own and not talk to one another and just sort of have like an experience, right? Just in the quiet and just deal with your thoughts and just be in nature and see what happens. And so when we were doing that, I spent literally I think it was like 4 hours and change laying in the dirt underneath I was laying on a bed of pine needles under a pine tree. And I was watching a bee just work like for hours in silence. Just like, imagine being that bee. Like, what's this bee doing? Who's this bee's family? What's up with this bee? And I remember looking at the sun and watching it go from one side of the sky to the other side of the sky, thinking like, I've been here for a long time, having no concept of time whatsoever, other than just the movement of the sun through the sky. I looked down at the dirt that I was laying in, which was, again, pine needles. I don't know why I keep saying dirt. They were light tan, like freshly fallen dead pine needles, because we're coming up on fall. And I remember I was on a slope a bit, and so I kind of like nestled in and like had to like scoop out a little area for this dump truck so that I wouldn't slide down or I'd cut that part out. So I wouldn't slide down the hill that I was on. And as I did that, I saw there was like a different color of pine needles underneath the light tan pine needles. And they were a little darker brown. And so I kind of like, out of curiosity, because what else am I going to do? Dug underneath that a bit more, found more pine needles. I'm like pretty deep into the pine needles at this point, but they were like black. And then I dug beyond that and there were more pine needles, but they were like really black and they were wet and kind of breaking apart. And then I dug beyond that and I got down to like this mud and it was dark black and it was dirt. And I realized it was like a foot deep. How many years have these pine needles been falling in this one place? And I realized that like this living thing above me drops these dead things to the ground, which over years and like layers of decomposition create the dirt, which becomes, this ecosystem for this underground life, making the nourishment to feed the tree and bring it life. Like the dead stuff brought the life, which provided oxygen for me to get to breathe, which the bee is also using to do his thing to like pollinate crops so that I can have food. And I was like, dang! Earth! It was so sick. And I was like, man, we got to get out in that moment every once in a while and have a time like that. And so, shameless plug, camp out coming up, bro, go lay in some pine needles. It'll change your life. But I came out of this experience with this greater appreciation for our world and just how special it all is. And I thought about just how delicate the balance of life on this planet is. And I just remember coming out like so thankful. I felt rested and refreshed and inspired, as you can tell. And, it'll wear off in another few weeks and I got to go do it again. But how we see the world, this is what I'm kind of getting to, will determine how we behave in it. Like our perspective, it makes almost all of the difference, to the point where you can be in a devastating situation, but if your perspective is a type of way, like if you've known one of those optimists, those people who are just like always like annoyingly in a good mood, like them, you know what I mean? That's it. They could be in the same situation you are and you're losing your freaking mind. So how we see the world will determine how we behave in it. Because like my situation at home hasn't changed, but my attitude toward it completely has. I feel different, even though things are the same. And the same thing applies for people. Like how we see people will determine how we treat them as well. How we treat others, interestingly, will determine how they see us. And it's cyclical, just like the tree and the dirt and the bee and me. Someone should write that as a children's book. But you see how it all works. Like, don't miss it. How you treat other people, how we see other people will determine how we treat them. How we treat others will determine how they see us. So it goes two ways. I wonder, do people see Jesus in you? When they look at you, do they see him? And how would they treat Jesus if he was standing right in front of them, the Son of God and Savior of the world? Is it different than how they treat you, and why? Now, of course, I'm not talking about literally seeing. Like, I'm not talking about physical sight and eyeballs here. I'm talking about a much more metaphorical thing. But this concept is not new. In fact, Jesus talked about it about 2,000 years ago. And if you're in Matthew chapter 6, again, that's where we'll be starting in verse 22. Now, these two verses are so fascinating to me to the point where I had to share them in this series. I almost had to make it fit into this series because I'm just so enamored by this verse. I've read it countless times. And this is in Matthew's account of Jesus' life and his earthly ministry. And these two verses have challenged me and they've inspired me, but not just me, millions of people over thousands of years. And they're going to continue to do it today, right here and right now. So here it goes. Matthew 6, 22 through 23. Your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. Now, there's a lot going on in here, and so I want to just take it apart for a second. Because if you look up and you do research on this passage, there are a lot of different interpretations even. There's a lot of different things that people think this passage means. But the original audience, I'm talking about first century Jewish people, would have understood it like this. The first quote, when your eye is healthy. This is a metaphor for how you see the world. He's not talking about literally having a healthy eyeball in your skull face. He's talking about when you're healthily seeing the world, when you see things from a healthy perspective. And what's really implied there is is putting other people above yourself, is giving people the benefit of the doubt, is seeing things optimistically, seeing them as God would see them. And we're talking about health, and we're talking about light, which if the eye is a light for the rest of your body, metaphorically speaking, then God is, and God is light, then we would be seeing how God sees the world. Does that make sense? So that is the definition of when your eye is healthy in this context. Now, no one really knows where that, the eye is the window to the soul phrase really comes from. It's kind of rooted in the Old Testament. There's these ancient Arab writers, and similar ideas can be found in ancient Latin proverbs and even extra biblical texts from 2,000 years ago. But of course, these kind of references in the Bible as well. But in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus used this sort of wordplay, and William Shakespeare did in the 15th century. So this wordplay has been going on for a long time, and that's why I think he's not talking about a literal eye and literal body, okay? So then anyway, when your eye is unhealthy, let's contrast it real quick. When your eye is unhealthy, when you're not seeing the world from a healthy perspective, when you're not seeing things as God sees them, this would be a person who is selfish and greedy, who is self-centered, who's just trying to get ahead, who's saying, I don't care how many bodies I leave bloody and bruised behind me. I'm going to rise to the top at all expenses. If this is you, Jesus says, then your whole body is filled with darkness. And then he says, how deep that darkness is. Because you think you have light. That's the last part of the passage, right? Is you think you've got light, but it's actually darkness. You think, oh, I'm successful, I'm succeeding, and people like me. Yeah, but it's for the wrong reasons. And guess what? It's about you, isn't it? Guess what, dude? That comes to an end. You will fail. You will decline. There will be a moment where there will be a moment. And the only thing that's going to last forever, the only one who will never let you down is Jesus. So we don't need to be pointing the world to us. We need to be pointing the world to him. That's the difference between healthy and unhealthy eyes. How you see the world, it makes all of the difference. It matters. It lights up the darkness, right? And I don't know about you, but I want to be a person who brings light. And you can kind of do it on your own. And I did this when I was in high school. And I love that I'm talking to high school right now. Because like when I was you, I wanted all of the recognition. I wanted all of the attention. I wanted all of the accolades. You know why? Because I was insecure. I didn't like myself at all, but I felt like if people liked me, I'd feel validated. But it was never enough. I still was depressed, still hated myself, still dabbled with self-harm and drugs and alcohol and stuff, trying to cope at the time. And it was empty. And then a bunch of people thought, man, Rin is so cool. And that's why I won like the homecoming king thing at my high school. It's like, yeah, me. And guess what? No one even knew I was a Christian, bro. Like I had that platform and I could have pointed people to Jesus, but I just pointed them to myself. And I look back on it with such regret all the time. Because I think like if hundreds, maybe thousands of people could have been pointed to Jesus and I could have just said like, no, it's actually not me. It's Christ in me. The whole narrative for who knows how many people could have been altered in that moment, but it wasn't. I took it all for myself. And then we graduated, never talked to anybody again. No one knows. Missed, gone, wasted. Don't do that. Don't do that. I was looking at the world with unhealthy eyes. And then when people saw me, they had unhealthy eyes because they didn't see Jesus in me. I wasn't doing anybody any favors. I wasn't pointing anyone to the true light. I was pointing them to the one on batteries that's just going to run out. Not an eternal light. That's Jesus. So, as we finish this series, remember a couple things. God is light. And this is a bar, so let's buckle up, okay? God is light, so he created light. Then he created you to be light in his image. Then he gave us Jesus, the light of the world. And now all of us who believe in him have the ability to shine God's light into the darkness, to be a multiplier of light. Imagine if it's like contagious, like COVID, this light, it hops onto somebody else and they become a beacon to shine in the darkness of whatever their dark sphere is. And then so on and so on and so on. And it becomes exponential. Literally, this is what Jesus did. You know how many followers he had? 12 disciples, right? And then they planted churches and they had ministries, right? And then the people in those churches and ministries reached more people, right? And now millions and millions of people have the light inside of them. Isn't that sick? Nothing says you can't be a part of that and do that today. So may you see the needs of the people around you. May you bless the people around you. Not so everyone will see you and think, oh, how cool are you? But so everyone will see our God and say, man, how cool is he?
Thank you for listening to the Riverbend Youth Podcast. To learn about our mission, gatherings, and more, please follow us on Instagram @RBYouth or check out our website at riverbend.com/students. If you were encouraged by this message, please subscribe, rate us, and consider sharing our channel with a friend. Available anywhere you get podcasts.